company commander named Yevgeny Ilyich, making emphasis to make sure that soldiers don't make unnecessary noises to allow them to move closer to their target. When the perfect opportunity arises, they begin their offensive operation utilizing the trenches to minimize the casualty. However, several soldiers are killed in the process. Some are mutilated, being at the receiving end of their enemy's sophisticated weaponry. One soldier tries to drag a wounded comrade to safety only to get half of his body blown off. As they manage to get closer to their enemies, some soldiers use bladed weapons and also engage in hand-to-hand combat. Bloodbath ensues. When the smoke clears, Meshikin proclaims that they got lucky. They are able to get rid of the Germans from this village despite losing a lot of their soldiers. While they get a hold of this village of Ovsyanikovo, they know that there's no reason to celebrate. Especially that they are in between Yusovo and Panovo. Both areas are still being manned by the Germans. Their goal is now to take control over those two areas. Sysoyev and Lavrov to replace the officers that were killed in the battle. Lavrov is tasked to put the wounded soldiers into a clean shack. This move would turn out to be a disaster as the shack would get annihilated. Sysoyev, on the other hand, is tasked to set up a perimeter. Ilyich admits to Kostya Kartsev that they lost half of their men. Kartsev now recalls what Meshikin mentioned earlier, that they got lucky they made it out alive. Ilyich wants Kartsev to be the squad leader. Kartsev is hesitant about the task. He explains that he prefers to be a messenger instead. They agree and Kartsev begins to function as one. While walking, they notice that one of the soldiers, Durkin, is traumatized. When pressed about what just happened, he explains that a German soldier was ready to surrender. He put his hands up but slipped and fell into his knife bayonet. Kartsev goes to the dead German soldier and removes the knife stuck in his eye. That makes Kartsev feels good. Kartsev mentions that Shurkin was a barber and a happy person during his training. They agree that he can use a drink or a cigarette to lift his spirit as he seems to be overwhelmed. Kartsev calls Barkov and asks him to share his drink. Barkov reaches out to his can and is surprised that his can is empty. He soon discovers that there's a bullet lodged in it. What a lucky break. That bullet could have ended his life. He believes that a priest must have prayed for him. They could have been killed for simply attacking without proper reconnaissance. Kartsev sees Viktor Somov, a 17-year-old kid who lied on paper just to serve his country. He is tasked to clear out the dead Germans, but he's too scared to begin. To give him a boost, Kartsev then lets him get a sip of the alcohol he got from the other soldier earlier. They soon find out that they are neighbors and begin to bond. These angers Sysoyev as Somov appears to abandon his assignment. Kartsev offers the schnapps to the soldiers that are with Sysoyev. Sysoyev stops them as he wants them to focus on the task at hand. Sysoyev reminds Kartsev that he's the leader of the platoon now. Kartsev boasts that he's the liaison to the commander. Political officer named Efim Zorn approaches company commander Yevgeny Ilyich. He's wondering how the Germans just gave up the village so easily. Ilyich says that they might have been overwhelmed, but they might be back to retaliate soon. The commander also expresses his frustration as he would have preferred to attack both Yusovo and Ovsyanikovo villages at the same time. Zorn tries to calm Ilyich. The commander tells him that he's calm and that he's the one shaking, referring to the right hand of Zorn that's been shaking uncontrollably. Zorn explains that he's been traumatized after witnessing soldiers being brutally killed. Ilyich receives a call from the deputy battalion commander. He reports that Ovsyanikovo has been liberated from the invaders. He also lets him know that half of his men died in the battle. The captain assures that reinforcement is on the way. Ilyich requests that they send 2 anti-tank guns instead of machine guns. At this point, Lieutenant Colonel Larionov butts in and tells Ilyich to take the machine guns instead, as they will need them to take control of the neighboring villages. Ilyich tries to reason out that a lot of his men died, but the lieutenant colonel is not interested to hear it. Instead, he orders Ilyich to follow his command. Ilyich has no other choice than to obey the order. Larionov receives bad news that the attack on Yusovo did not go as planned. Not only that, the Germans fired at the Ovsyanikovo. It's not outside the realm of possibility that the Germans regain control of Ovsyanikovo. The soldier asks if they can send some help. Larionov is anticipating the arrival of the 30th Army Battalion, but he's not quite sure when they'd be arriving. Other than that, there's nothing he can do at the moment. He is, however, aware that Ilyich and his men are in a very vulnerable situation. Ilyich meets with the officers and lets them know that they are not backing down. He already reveals that there's no reinforcement on the way and that they are on their own. They must have each other's back to survive. A surveillance plane passes by. Fearing that it will begin to drop bombs, they panic to look for places to hide. To their surprise, instead of bombs, the plane drops some pamphlets letting them know that if they choose to deflect, they will not be harmed. A strategic way of creating conflict within. This turns out to be effective. Political officer Zorn is up in arms ordering every soldier not to touch or read the pamphlets. He knows that these papers can brainwash some soldiers that have been through hell. When Kartsev questions his command, he reminds him that he was a former boxer and that he can hurt him if he wants to. While in the trenches, Vlasyuk and Junior Lieutenant Rykov, the head of counterintelligence, are heading their way dodging the onslaught of the Germans. Vlasyuk has a bullet lodged in the back of his band. Both of them are able to make it to safety. Rykov meets with Ilyich and Zorn and tells them to make sure that every leaflet is recovered. Ilyich is surprised to hear such an order, as this seems to be preposterous given the situation they are in. He explains that he already lost several soldiers and that he will not risk their lives by asking them to pick up some pamphlets. This aggravates Rykov, who then threatens Ilyich. Rykov tries to speak with the battalion commander, but he's not available at the moment. He goes out and checks if soldiers are hiding leaflets. He confronts Kartsev, who refuses to open his coat for inspection. Rykov points a gun at him, but that does not stop Kartsev from disobeying his order. Tension rises when Rykov is on the verge of squeezing the trigger to kill Kartsev. Ilyich begs Kartsev to follow the order. Reluctantly, Kartsev opens his coat and even challenges Rykov to shoot him. Rykov walks away to inspect the rest of the soldiers. One soldier is caught hiding some pamphlets. He explains that he'd use them to roll tobacco, but his fate has been sealed. Ilyich appeals to the battalion commander to spare the life of the soldier that just got caught. He reasons out that he needs all his men and that executing him will be detrimental to the morale of the soldiers. The battalion commander assures him that the soldier won't be charged for now. When the lieutenant colonel finds out about the situation, he is surprised why the soldier has not been executed yet. Ilyich warns Rykov that he has 80 soldiers that have survived the battle and that they might react violently if they witness one of them being executed. This does not stop Rykov from taking the prisoner outside. As the detainee, Rykov, and Vlasyuk leave the trench, German forces start to open fire. Vlasyuk is trapped in a trench while Rykov is hit. The prisoner helps him control the bleeding. He shares that he once carried a pregnant goat to have it checked by a vet. He also adds that he always wanted a son, but he now has 4 children. This infuriates Rykov, as he thinks that the prisoner is befriending him to gain a favor. He threatens to shoot him if he runs. The prisoner stays with him all throughout and even forgives him. The battalion commander asks the lieutenant colonel that they send soldiers and ammunition to Ovsyanikovo. The latter denies the request, as this will result in certain death. Back to Ovsyanikovo, Kartsev confronts Somov, who snitched on the prisoner about hiding some leaflets earlier. Somov then tells Ilyich how he and his friend, Oleg, stopped Kartsev from robbing a wealthy man. A week later, Oleg would get stabbed, but he'd survive. Somov then reveals that Kartsev has been issued a federal warrant. He's a wanted criminal. Kartsev also shares his version of how he got to know Somov back then. Kartsev aims his gun at Somov and asks for permission to kill Somov. Ilyich pacifies everyone as guns are drawn at this point. Cooler heads prevail and no one is killed. Meanwhile, Larionov receives an update that the Germans have attacked Ovsyanikovo. Though clearly outnumbered, the Soviet forces fight back with gallantry. Vlasyuk and Junior Lieutenant Rykov are caught by the German forces. Vlasyuk shows his pass to prevent from getting executed. This pass is one of the pamphlets that was dropped off a plane. To save his life, he is asked to kill Rykov. Vlasyuk initially points the gun at Rykov, then chooses to kill himself instead. Rykov is then executed. Somov reports back to Ilyich after surviving an attack. He lets him know that the Germans are not going to attack but rather use mortars to bury the trenches. Somov further explains that he can speak German. Despite the threat, Ilyich has no plans of backing down. Instead, he prepares his men. He commands that some will stay and others will have to withdraw to safety. Some soldiers chose to stay. The movie ends with the Germans begin the onslaught, firing at all cylinders. As they move closer, Ilyich opens fire at them at close range, killing a number of German soldiers in the process. Knowing that his men whom he asked to withdraw are already out of the danger zone, Ilyich decides to back down along with his men who survived and report to Larionov. Larionov orders them to go back and drive the Germans out. Ilyich refuses to follow the order, as this will just cause senseless death to all of them. In private, Larionov explains to Ilyich the need to go back and claim Ovsyanikovo again. They will make the Germans believe that